Hello. Good night, everybody.
Night.
Thank you for being here. You're like the survivors at Saturday night here with us. What?
Survivors of week 1.
Yeah, survivors of week 1 at Saturday night. So thank you for your presence. My name is Leila Saraiva. I'm the coordinator of Shandia platform, and I'll be moderating this panel. And well, at first, I would like to call our panelists before presenting the panel. And so I would like to call Sineia del Valle, please. Sineia. Sorry. And also, please, Balkissou Buba from Repaliac and GATC. Also like to call Solange from RRI and Hege from Norway. And please, Lina from Climate Champions. And sorry, and Miguel from AIDESEP. Beleza. Okay, welcome. Thank you for being here with us. And so we're about to start our panel. The idea today is to talk about the current pledge destined to apply more resources for Indigenous peoples and local community. So the idea today is to evaluate the current pledge, but also to talk about what do we want in the future pledge that we do know that is being planned to be released, to be launched in COP30. So we start our night, with the keynote speech from Balkissou Buba that he's going to talk on behalf of the Global Alliance of Territorial Community. Thank you, Balki, for being here with us.
Thank you very much, Leila, for giving me the floor. And thank you for having me as part of the speakers for this event. As the moderator said, I am Balkissou Buba from the Global Alliance of Territorial Communities. I'm from the Bororo Pastoralist Community of Cameroon. I'm from the Repaliac Network as well. And the Global Alliance, we are found in the Amazon Basin, in the Mesoamerica, the Congo Basin, Brazil, and Indonesia. For centuries, we have stood on the front lines, defending our lands against relentless threats, land grabs, oil projects, wildfires, mining, and monocultures. Despite these dangers, we have persisted, even when facing powerful interests with vast resources, armed only with our resilience and knowledge. Our survival and the survival of humanity depends on continuing this fight. Today, I bring a message from the territories at the heart of the fight against climate change and biodiversity loss. It is a call for unity and action for the pledge we need to sustain our vital role. The 1.7 billion pledge made in 2021 was historic. It brought hope and inspired action, increasing funding for our communities and raising awareness of the importance of our territories. The latest FTFG report indicates that 79 of the committed funds have already been invested. While this reflects donors' efforts to advance the pledge, the situation regarding direct investment remains discouraging. Of all the resources invested since the start of the commitment, only 6% has been allocated directly to our organizations and communities. This has indeed been progress between 2022 and 2023, with direct investment increasing from 2.1% to 10.6%. While we must acknowledge this improvement, progress remains painfully slow and disconnected from the urgency in our territories. As direct financing grows at an annual rate of just 8%, we continue to face threats, land grabbing, mining, agribusinesses that endanger our lives and territories. Despite these challenges, we persist in protecting the forests, which house 80% of biodiversity and are crucial for carbon sequestration. The little amount invested directly on our communities by the current pledge shows that we are far from hedging the colonialist structure of climate and biodiversity finance. We must accelerate efforts to ensure resources reach those who truly preserve the forest. Recognizing this big problem is crucial for the current and future pledge. We seize this opportunity of this event to also share how a new edition of pledge should look like for Indigenous people. The pledge we want is built on partnership. We are not beneficiaries. We are leaders, protectors, and partners in creating climate solutions. A new pledge must recognize this by ensuring we are participating in its decision-making structures. It must respect our traditional governance and cultural practices, which have safeguarded the world's most precious ecosystems for generations. The pledge must be inclusive and holistic. It must recognize that ecosystems are interconnected. Forests, rivers, coasts, and valleys thrive together. Solutions must address climate and biodiversity as a whole. It must support all of us, Indigenous people, local communities, Afro-descents, and ensure that resources directly reach women, youths who are the backbone of our communities. The pledge we want is bold and courageous. The challenges we face demand more than symbolic gestures. By 2030, donors must commit to substantial increase in direct funding for Indigenous peoples and the local communities-led initiatives. This is not just about money. It's about recognizing our rights to decide how these resources are used, empowering us to create solutions rooted in our knowledge and priorities. The pledge we want goes beyond funding. It must support our fight for our land rights, against violence in our territories, guarantee emergency funding in moments of crisis, and support our ability to protect our people and lands. Finally, the pledge we want is grounded in trust and accountability. Trust is earned through transparency and respect. The systems created under this pledge must be accessible, inclusive, and reflective of our diversity. We need policies that honor our languages, cultures, and ways of reporting, creating a foundation for mutual accountability. As we showcase on the Shandia platform on the Shandia Forum 2024, we are building a flourishing network of territorial funds. The Shandia mechanism continues to grow, and the forum is made it clear that its impacts on the ground are tangible, even though we still face insufficient funding. By strengthening territorial mechanisms, Shandia amplifies local impacts and promotes innovative practices, prioritizing effective direct financing for Indigenous people and local communities. We are doing our part. Now it's essential that donors listen to our practices and learn from them, instead of trying to adapt us to other models. This is the pledge we want, one that empowers us, uplifts us, and trusts us to lead. A pledge that recognizes the true measure of success: thriving forests, clean rivers, vibrant communities, and a living planet for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your words, Balki. I think we have a clear way to move forward with the next pledge right now. Thank you very much. And I'll give the floor right now to Solange and Torbjørn. I think Solange will start, right? Thank you, Solange.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. And thank you, Balki, for your thoughtful remarks. I'll be presenting with Torbjørn, but Torbjørn will be doing the hard work. He's the one who made all the presentation, and very good one. But what I'll do is provide just a framing to the presentation, and Torbjørn will go into detail. And as part of this presentation, we would like to share the findings of the Path to Scale dashboard. And as many of you know, the Path to Scale dashboard is a partnership between Rainforest Foundation, Norway, and RRI. We put it together, and it's a very innovative tool because for the first time, all publicly available data on, funding data on indigenous peoples, local communities, and Afro-descendants on tenure and forest guardianship has been really compiled. So there's a lot of good information in that pledge we want in the Path to Scale dashboard. And the reason why also we wanted to put that dashboard with our RFN is mainly to look at three things: accountability, transparency, and coordination. And when we talk about accountability here, it's about two ways, right? Donors to be accountable, but also right holders. But here we're talking about downward accountability. And transparency also, it's good to have access to information. And if you really want how much or who is contributing to IPNLC tenure right or forest guardianship, you go into the Path to Scale dashboard, you can look into it. And Torbjørn will share the QR code where you can go. And also I have some a postcard that I will share later on. And and we have some updated figures that we want to share. And another thing also that we want to really, by looking into the Path to Scale, is to link it to the Pledge We Want campaign, and which is a pledge. It's a campaign that we launched during Climate Week at RRI, and that campaign actually goes beyond just RRI. And I would just say this is a global campaign that we want to launch and invite everyone to join us in that campaign. And just by hearing Balki really telling us the type of pledge we want, that from GATC they want, I was like, wow, this is really something that we need to capture. And I've been hearing a lot of the type of pledge we want, throughout the this COP29. So as you could see, we want it to be inclusive, accountable, and make sure that we hear the voices of right holders, of women and youth within those communities. So I'll leave it there and I'll give the floor to my colleague Torbjørn, who will tell you more about the exciting figure and what we have learned. Thank you.
Thank you, Solange. Yes, so I will present some updated figures from what we call the Path to Scale dashboard. And as Solange already mentioned, the Path to Scale dashboard is a collaboration between RRI and RFN that is set up to monitor international donor funding for indigenous people, local communities, and Afro-descendants, tenure rights, and forest guardianship. And it covers the years from 2011 to now, also some figures on 2024. And this is built by gathering already publicly available information from a diverse group of donors. But this page actually collects that information and puts it in one place and makes it searchable for all, basically. And this is something that we intend to keep updated, updating the data twice a year so that it will be fresh and continuously improved. And we just happen to have some updated numbers now right before COP. And this whole webpage was published first time in April. Together with it, we also published a report, the state of funding for tenure rights and forest guardianship, that analyzed the data from the dashboard. So the key findings, obviously, it's only half a year since we updated this data the last time, so there's no major shifts, right? It doesn't change that fast. The overall conclusions remain. What we found in April was that overall funding for this cause had increased by 36%. Since 2020, and that 72% of that increase was from the donors behind the IPNLC Forest Tenure Pledge, the FTFG. So, and in the update now, we've found some additional funding both in 2022 and 2023, which brings those figures up for those two countries up by 9%. But overall, our findings corroborates the FTFG's own reporting and corroborates that funding is actually increasing across the board, and that the main source of this funding, this increase, is the FTFG, the Forest Tenures Funders Group. And in this report, in this update, which we have actually published a text on the Past to Scale dashboard now, which goes through the main finding. We also wanted to highlight that we have found some new projects, one of them being a major project funded by the Amazon Fund, which I found particularly encouraging. The Amazon Fund was a major source of contributions, funding in this dashboard, in the space, until it was frozen. So it's very encouraging to see that it's now back operating and funding is running again. We also found that funding had increased across all regions and were being dispersed more across more countries. And that in 2023, for the first time, Africa was likely receiving more funding than Latin America for the first time, and this is seems to continue into 2024. What we're also seeing is that after a substantial increase in 2021, funding seems to be stabilizing from year to year at a level of about $500 million, a bit above $500 million, which still puts us some distance behind the Path to Scale target, which was to mobilize 10 billion over this decade. So this shows that while funding has increased as a consequence of the pledge, there is still a need for a new and increased pledge to succeed the existing one. Now, what we also wanted to do with this update, in which we put online together on this Path to Scale dashboard, is to try to say something that goes beyond just the numbers, the figures, and to present some examples of actual results on the ground that can be connected to this funding that we have in the dashboard, and it also connected to the IPNLC pledge. And we're doing this both to try to show and bring more insights and transparency on what is happening beyond that very numbers-driven information that is available in the dashboard, but also to show that the pledge actually works. Because at the end of the day, we're all doing this. What we want to see is actual improvements in indigenous peoples and local communities and Afro-descendants' rights, and not just more money, right? So we wanted to illustrate those results. And by putting them on the Path to Scale dashboard, we also made explicit connections between the donor entries, the disbursements that are already cataloged in dashboard, and the results, so we can connect them to the specific donor disbursement. And we hope that this is something that we can keep building out on this page. Right. So we've included some examples based on the work that RFN and RRI have contributed to and provided funding for, and in collaboration with a broad range of IPNLC organizations and other allied organizations since the start of the pledge. But some of them, these projects or our results, also date back to work that has taken place over decades, which also illustrates, I think, the importance of long-term commitments in this space that takes time to realize these outcomes. And it takes a long-term commitment from the donors and everyone else involved. So quickly, in the DRC, as I guess many of you know, in 2022, after a long advocacy led by the GPA and other organizations in the DRC, the government adopted a law which recognized the rights of indigenous Pygmy people. And this was supported by RFN, RRI, and others, and Norway has been a consistent donor of this work, which is expected to improve Pygmy rights and also help conserve over 14.5 million hectares of the DRC intact forests, in addition to advancing the rights and well-being of Pygmy people. Another example is from the Peru-Brazil border region, where the highest concentration of indigenous peoples living in voluntary isolation lives across an area spread across 2 corridors that together comprise 25 million hectares of mostly highly intact forest. And here RFN has been working with, supporting local organizations such as AIDESEP, FENAMAD, COYAB, and Univaja since 2004, actually, working to document the presence of these isolated communities, map their territories, protect and manage them, advance the legal recognition, and the community's rights to live in voluntary isolation. This has also received long-term support from Norway, and since 2023, it is also supported by the Best of the Earth Fund and BMZ, the German funding agency. In later years, this project has contributed to the legal recognition of indigenous reserves covering 3.2 million hectares on the Peruvian side of the border. And in 2023, indigenous organizations were successful in preventing changes to the legal framework, the law that protects the rights of indigenous peoples in voluntary isolation, which was being threatened by proposals in the Congress. And lastly, clarify, together with funding from Best of the Earth Fund, RRI has collaborated with GATC and Campaign for Nature and gathered 208 leaders from 79 organizations to develop a project pipeline advancing the recognition of potentially huge areas of IPNC and Afro-descendant peoples' lands, and which has led to 30 sub-pilot grants that aim at securing more than 10 million hectares. So these are just a few examples. There are more available online on the webpage, and the text that we have published now, and which you can access by taking a picture of this QR code. And there are obviously many more results out there in the real world. I also want to recognize, I scrolled through the FTFG report just before this event, and there are also a number of examples of results made possible by the funding from the IPNLC pledge in that report. And they all show what increased support for indigenous peoples and local communities can lead to, and why it's important that we continue and scale up this support further so that we can really capitalize on this momentum and the important groundwork that has been done over many years and really shift gear in recognizing indigenous peoples and local communities' rights for this guardianship in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you, Solange and Torbjørn, for the presentation. And I think we got to know more about the numbers right now and also bringing the concrete case. Thank you very much. So right now, I'll give the floor to Hege, that is going to talk on behalf of the Forest Tenure Funders Group, as she is the co-chair, and on behalf of Norway. Thank you, Hege.
Thank you so much, Leila, and thanks to everyone for inviting me to take part in this very interesting panel and the interesting conversation. As Leila said, Norway is this year chairing the Forest Tenure Funders Group. We're working together with the Christensen Fund as our vice chair, and then I think you probably already know that it's 5 countries That's Norway, the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, and the Kingdom of Netherlands. And then it is 20 or more philanthropies. Ford Foundation has been instrumental. We have the Bezos Earth Fund. We have the Protect Our Planet Challenge, which is a group of many philanthropies. We have Wellsprings and Oak and Good Energies and a number of others. And I think there's some more that has joined the group since we started in 2021. I also wanted to recognize my fellow panelists. One interesting fact is that when I started working on these issues more than 20 years ago, most of the panels consisted of men. No, most of the panels consist of women. At least it does tonight. So we don't have to make a big point out of that, but I think maybe the gender and the gender equality issues is also starting to surface more and more as part of this movement, and I think I'm thrilled to see that. So I've been asked to touch on 4 different things, so bear with me. I think many of you followed the event that was hosted by the United Kingdom on the 12th of November when the Foreign Secretary David Lammy spoke, and Balkissou gave an excellent keynote also at that event, where several funders came together, both UK, Norway, Bezos Earth Fund, and others, being very outspoken that we are interested in continuing with the new pledge. I think also other prominent funders have stated that they are interested. So the donor group is working towards a new pledge. We don't know exactly if it will be the same group of funders or if there will be some differences. Some may, for various reasons, leave the group. And then, of course, we hope to recruit new ones. And I know many of you are working on recruiting new funders and finding out if there's new philanthropies being developed and that may be interested in these issues, and if there's more governments that could also come on board. I think one of course, a key reason for why we're interested in developing a new pledge is because we see that it works, right? It gives results on the ground. And Torbjørn just mentioned some of the big results that we've seen. It's thanks to your advocacy. It's also thanks to the political will in tropical forest countries. It is almost impossible to do this work unless we have governments that wants to advance the tenure rights of indigenous peoples and local communities. I think many of us, or we have all noticed that Brazil is back, as President Lula says, and that 10 new indigenous territories have been acknowledged or recognized in Brazil since he took office. That is, of course, a big accomplishment by the government of Brazil, but it is also, I think, supported in so many ways by many of us who are here in this room. And also some other good news from Brazil last week is that deforestation is down, and it's down considerably, 30% in the Amazon, 25% in the Cerrado. So it means that with political will, with grassroots action, with all the right players on board, we do see landmark, results with world impact. So it helps to organize and it helps to fight back. And others have already touched on some of the gains in Peru and in DRC with the landmark Indigenous rights bill that we supported. Colombia, of course, with the decree, I think it's called 632, but it means that indigenous territories will have the same status as municipalities, and it's a very interesting decree that Colombia is implementing. I think many of us are also supporting that that work. And not to forget Indonesia, where there's a social forestry program that goes to advance the rights of masyarakat adat in many parts of the country, and important to also recognize and scale up that work, and many more in many more countries. So without the results on the ground, there would be less interest. So I think we need to keep on highlighting these results and how that helps mitigate both the climate crisis and the nature crisis, and how they are interlinked, as well as delivering on sustainable development goals. So I think from my vantage point, which I realize is probably a little bit different from many others here, is that it seems to me that the discourse on Indigenous peoples and local communities' forest tenure rights has elevated during the last 3 to 4 years. We understand that there is still shortages, or that there's gaps to fill, and a need to advance more. But it's never been talked about, as far as I know, in so many settings, at so many high-level meetings, and so many conferences. It's sort of in every politician's speaking bullet points, and it's highlighted in so many venues, and it's reflected in funding. And as you noted, the Forest Tenure Funders Group, or we have now, I think in the 2023 report, we said that we're now reaching 100 Indigenous organizations with direct funding, and that's up from less than 40 the year before. So it takes time, but we are moving in the right direction. So if I have this glass ball then and look into the future, where do we go from here? In the existing pledge, the Glasgow Leaders Declaration was a very important hook. It's about the main goal is to halt and reverse forest loss and land degradation by 2030. So that's an overall goal. What's emerging much more now is, of course, the link between nature and climate with the biodiversity framework. So I think many funders are very interested in showcasing that more, and as you say, Indigenous communities or Indigenous peoples and local communities inhabit so many of the most biodiversity-rich areas on the planet. So focus on the interrelatedness of ecosystems and how climate and nature influence and converge. And then we still have all these discussions, right? So I'm just sharing some of the discussions with you. Nothing has really been, decided as such yet. But we'd like to see a focus on impact. Impact is important. It's not just about money, but it's on impact on the ground, in the field, in the forest, with the people. We haven't decided on what sort of actual metrics would look like, but we think a way to have a pledge around impact, and that a way to measure impact would be important and probably necessary. And then, of course, we need to find a balance between the quantitative and the qualitative. Yeah, it's easy to focus a lot on numbers and statistics, but there's obviously a very strong qualitative side to the work we're doing when it comes to sustaining the cultural heritage of so many forest communities. We also need to keep in mind that the funders are very, very different. Governments are very different from philanthropies. Philanthropies are very different from each other. And I don't want to bore you with all the details of that, but it means that some have a mandate to do something and others have a mandate to do something very different. It also means that our reporting requirements are different. Like public funders like Norway have to be transparent about everything we fund and put it on a government website and report it to the OECD DAC office in Paris. Some of the philanthropic funders are not necessarily, that's not necessarily why they're in this, right? Of course, funders like the Ford Foundation are extremely transparent, and many of them are, but not all philanthropies have reporting capacity. So the may want to report at a very overarching level. And the capacity between the different funders is also very different. And then when it comes to the issues around direct finance, I think that's something that we work a lot on, and that it's a very interesting part of this debate. I think if we want to attract more funders, we need to define it in a way that it's possible for funders to fund. But I know you're trying to do that. But another part of it is to see how intermediaries, if they are civil society intermediaries or multilateral intermediaries, how they would like to be accountable and give indigenous peoples and local communities and Afro-descendants influence in their decision-making systems. Yeah. And as a government donor, I'm a bit careful with being too prescriptive about how exactly that should look like in each organization, because that's also something these various organizations have to think about themselves, right, and come up with some guidelines for how they want to do that. And we're also, should we focus only on tenure, or should we also include more management, environmental defenders, or environmental human rights defenders? We have identified that as an underfunded area, an area that needs much more attention. Yeah. But we need to deliver or develop a pledge that we know we can deliver. We don't really want to. We want it to be with confidence. We're very much on track with the present pledge, so we'd like to stay on track for the coming one. And we also, in addition to working with all the youth, with indigenous organizations, the local community organizations across funders, we'd also like to engage much more with tropical forest countries and on their governments. As many of you know, we're very engaged, or Norway and many other countries are very engaged in the Forest and Climate Leaders Partnership, where we have established a platform for working together. And one of the things we're exploring under that platform is a call to action where tropical forest countries can, if they want to scale up the recognition for forest tenure or land titling in their countries. And there was an interesting event in Cali, in Colombia in October, where both Peru and Colombia and Brazil came together around that issue. So building that political will and that political aspiration in tropical forest country governments, and supporting them in implementing their priorities in this field is also something we put a lot of attention to. And that's also how we've understood the Global Alliance of Territorial Communities, that this is something that you're interested in pursuing. So we hope to generate more interest in the next pledge, both from existing and new funders, from tropical forest country governments, as well as, of course, to work together with you, both indigenous organizations as well as the sort of rights-based co-sponsoring organizations, and what a next pledge could look like. So I'll just mention two. I know I've talked for a long time, but I'll mention two events. There's an event organized by the Forest and Climate Leaders Partnership on Monday at 9:30 at the UNFF Pavilion, that will touch both on the existing pledge, but it will also go into tropical forest country governments and what they would like to develop. We also have an event at the Nordic Pavilion on the 21st at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, where we are showcasing results from the existing pledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Hege, for sharing all your thinking under FTFG about the next pledge. And well, right now we're going to listen to Lina, that is going to talk on behalf of the climate champions, and we'll share a little bit of the meeting we had yesterday. Thank you, Lina.
Thanks, Leila. Hey, everybody. I was thinking that hopefully many of you were there yesterday. I see really a lot of familiar faces. So I will be extremely brief in my remarks. And thanks for the opportunity to report back. The meeting yesterday focused on direct access to finance for Indigenous peoples in the overarching context of the conversation that we are having. And just I think I'll just share like some reflections, maybe also based on the remarks that Hege made coming out of those conversations. So first of all, maybe I should say who I am, regardless of having seen many of you in several meetings already. So just mentioning that my name is Lina and I work for the UN High-Level Champions. The UN High-Level Champions are the overseeing like the Marrakesh Partnership and the Global Climate Action Agenda, and in that capacity, like working with non-state actors, that includes Indigenous peoples, local communities, businesses, and other stakeholders, like to increase ambition, overall ambition in this process. And we heard yesterday from Razan that really like supporting Indigenous people and supporting direct access to finance for Indigenous people is one of what we believe is a key vehicle, like to increase agency of Indigenous people, self-determination, which will help in our view with achieving greater ambition overall. We also yesterday, and building what Hege said in terms of like the need for still making the evidence, like we had heard that there's a global IP data study on the way that Her Excellency Razan launched this year, coming out of COP28, that we also hope will help with building and making the case. It's been done by Elatia, it's Indigenous-led, and really like, building the case from across like 7 sociocultural regions on the important role that Indigenous people are playing, like in all these ecosystems, to make the case like for why like Indigenous people like need to be better supported, like not only through the existing pledge, but from many other sources, hopefully. And then what else can I tell you from yesterday, which stood out for me? As Hege said, like we heard from the Brazilian government as well yesterday, and maybe just to complement like on what was mentioned already in terms of like the priorities, we had just another meeting with the Brazilian government, so I was able to actually take even better notes. So they assured that the COP30 presidency will be a massive opportunity for Indigenous peoples, and based on a massive increase of participation of Indigenous peoples. As many of you know, at COP28, like we had record numbers of Indigenous peoples like attending, and as Razan often says, like that was by design, because obviously inclusion like was one of the key theories of change on how you can actually have more ambition in this process, and more ambition like through inclusion. And I think Brazil will be a place where this will be taken forward at a much higher scale. The Brazilian government has an ambition to have 5,000 Indigenous leaders in Belém, not inside necessarily the process, but definitely they mentioned like the figures from COP28 that they want to surpass like what was achieved at COP28, was what was roughly 330 Indigenous delegates. with a higher amount through like special accreditation. They heard the call like for more funding that needs to go to Indigenous people, and also reiterate that they see that it's creating legacy for Indigenous people's policy and for funding of projects for Indigenous people across the globe. And they stress that they are looking to strengthen new financial facilities to allocate funding to Indigenous peoples on the ground to support policies, rights, and way of life. And I think, overall, like that was very good news. Again, like from Brazil. So I think like, everything that Hege said, I think for me is hopefully there will be so much momentum and like politically will shown by the COP presidency that the work that the Forest Turner Funder Group, the FCLP need to do to still like create more interest, like in a new pledge, like will hopefully be easier by the political support from the presidency. And then last but not least, something that wasn't mentioned, but I think that came out also yesterday, is definitely the efforts on the existing pledge are really important. I think like also the discussion on like what direct access to finance is are important, but primarily like we also need to have more finance generally for Indigenous peoples. And like one actor, I think that's many of you have been actually like pushed and advocated for very successfully through the IPAC, like of the GCF, like has come forward like yesterday, after we also had like conversations in New York on direct access to finance, and that is the GCF. And they also reassured that they have heard, like you, that they have heard Indigenous peoples like on the need for like multilateral finance to be more fit for purpose. And they are developing a program on locally led adaptation. They develop guidelines for locally led adaptation that will present it to the next board meeting and to the IPAC. They want to co-develop that as one potential vehicle. And I think like keeping the pressure up there and keeping like the work up there is a really good opportunity. And they made the announcement to hold a dialogue on direct access to finance in multilateral, in the GCF context, funded by the GCF for Indigenous peoples next year in Malaysia, early next year. And I think, again, like that was, I think, very positive announcement, long expected from members of the GCF IPAC, but I think like really good that this now materialized in a concrete like commitment. So last words from me. Razan sends her regards again. She also committed to stay committed beyond her Turner as high-level champion this year. Niga was in the presidency Indigenous People Dialogue that also some of you attended just before this. She also reassured all her commitment and support for Indigenous people like on the issue. And we will have a new high-level champion. And I'm very confident that the new person will also be committed to the issue. So count on the high-level champion's support and count on my personal support as well. So looking forward to question and the discussion now.
Thank you very much, Lina, for the updates about yesterday. I think we did have a good overview, starting with Balkissou, talking about how would look like a new pledge would look like for the Indigenous people, and also listening to Solange and Torbjørn, showing us the numbers and giving us the panorama of how funding for Indigenous peoples and local communities are being applied. And right now, and then listening to how the FTFG is planning the new pledge and also the updates of the meeting yesterday. So right now, the idea is to make the connection between all this discussion and what is happening on the ground. So we're going to listen to indigenous leaders that are going to share their experience with direct funding on their territories. So I'll pass the voice to Miguel Guimarães from AIDESEP, and he is going to share his experience with direct funding, and he's going to speak in Spanish for you that need the I don't know how to say this, but you got me. Miguel.
Tan, muchas gracias por la invitación. También saludar al panel, mujeres lideresas, líderes globales, con quien tengo el gusto de compartir. No, ya no. Solo algunas informaciones. Yo soy Miguel Guimarães Vázquez, vicepresidente de AIDESEP. AIDESEP es la Asociación Interétnica de Desarrollo de la Selva Peruana, que representa a más de 109 federaciones, 2.400 comunidades al nivel de la Amazonía peruana. Nosotros creemos que los pueblos indígenas son esenciales en la conservación de bosques, biodiversidad y lucha contra el cambio climático, pero enfrentamos barreras para acceder al financiamiento climático. Los principales desafíos que encontramos en este camino de acceder a los fondos climáticos es falta de consulta. Muchos proyectos climáticos son diseñados sin consulta activa de los pueblos indígenas, lo que perpetúa desigualdades. El manejo estatal de los fondos tienden a minimizar beneficios directos a las comunidades indígenas, desviando los recursos hacia la burocracia. Barreras culturales, estructurales, obstáculos lingüísticos, culturales, administrativos, dificultan la implementación efectiva de programas o proyectos. Para nosotros es clave contar con un fondo indígena amazónico, ¿no? Que es un mecanismo propio para ejecutar los fondos directamente en las comunidades. También tenemos experiencias, por ejemplo, el caso de MD Sabeto, más de 2.300 hectáreas tituladas y 44 emprendimientos indígenas financiados y que los pueblos indígenas o las organizaciones indígenas han manejado directamente bajo su gobernanza. También para nosotros es importante priorizar la titulación de territorios, base para frenar la deforestación y fortalecer los derechos colectivos que tienen los pueblos indígenas en la Amazonía. Para avanzar en financiamiento directo para los pueblos indígenas, es importante, sobre todo, alianzas basadas en respeto mutuo, colaboración equitativa con gobiernos y organizaciones internacionales, desarrollo de capacidades técnicas, formación en áreas claves como mitigación, adaptación y transición hacia energías limpias y justas. No mercado y equidad es fundamental para priorizar mecanismos financieros que respeten los derechos indígenas y distribuyan beneficios de manera justa y equitativa. Para nosotros es importante para lograr estos fines o objetivos comunes para los pueblos indígenas asegurar la inclusión real. La participación de los pueblos indígenas no es opcional para nosotros, es una necesidad para alcanzar metas globales de biodiversidad y cambio climático. También es importante fortalecer compromisos internacionales, ¿no? Invocar a los estados y financiadores, respaldar iniciativas indígenas como el Fondo Amazónico y replicar el éxito de programas como el MD Sabeto. Transparencia y autonomía. Los pueblos indígenas deben tener un rol central y activo en la gestión de los recursos destinados a su desarrollo y conservación de acuerdo a sus planes de vida. Sin los pueblos indígenas no hay futuro para los bosques ni para el clima. Para nosotros es importante el financiamiento para los pueblos indígenas, no solo en un acto de justicia, sino una estrategia indispensable para asegurar el futuro del planeta. Muchas gracias. Irak.
Thank you, Miguel. And well, now we are going to listen to Sineia del Valle. Go ahead.
Vou falar em português, então vocês têm que pegar o tradutor para que possa me ouvir. Esse é um assunto muito importante, falar do financiamento, né? Eu venho acompanhando. Bom, eu vou falar a partir de Glasgow, né? Desde a COP de Glasgow, todos os anúncios que são feitos sobre a questão do financiamento, eu venho acompanhando e também acompanhando no meu país, que é o Brasil, mas olhando para uma questão global. Não está passando?
Não.
Opa, tradução.
We have a problem with the device translation, okay? It's working? Okay. Talvez você fala mais.
Vamos lá.
It's not. Oh,
Ok?
so the Spanish is working. Okay, people are not listening to the translation from Portuguese there? Okay, sorry.
Ok. Então, vou começar novamente para que todos possam ouvir. Desde que eu acompanho, eu sou Sineia do Vale, do povo Wapichana, né? Agora estou na copresidência do Caucus Indígena, representante da América Latina e Caribe, mas a minha organização de base é o Conselho Indígena de Roraima, que fica na Amazônia, na fronteira do Brasil com a Venezuela e a Guiana. Desde 2011 eu acompanho as COP, as negociações nas conferências de Bonn, e sempre eu estou acompanhando essa questão do financiamento. E aí eu queria partir da COP de Glasgow. Na COP de Glasgow, eu vi o anúncio, por exemplo, né, de um volume de recurso muito grande para a questão dos povos indígenas. Então, nós saímos daquela COP, eu e outros indígenas, muito felizes. Tem muito dinheiro para implementar ações para a questão dos povos indígenas. Direito à terra, né, o enfrentamento às mudanças climáticas, mas a gente precisa ver os mecanismos que são usados para que esses recursos entrem nos países, né? E cada país é diferente, né? Cada país tem sua burocracia para que esses recursos cheguem aos povos indígenas. Então, a cada COP eu venho acompanhando, né? Cada vez a gente ouve mais um lançamento de recurso. Essa COP não é diferente. A COP de Dubai, tivemos o recurso de perdas e danos. Então, todo esse trabalho que eu venho acompanhando e fazendo um caminho de volta para as comunidades indígenas, principalmente na Amazônia, é saber quais os mecanismos que vão ser de fato criados para os povos indígenas acessar esses recursos. Mas por que que os povos indígenas precisam desse recurso, né, para que chegue diretamente nas suas organizações? A gente ouviu aqui que tem recursos que vai apoiar os governos, principalmente o governo do Brasil, com certeza para demarcação de terra, mas a gente precisa de recursos também que chegue diretamente às organizações indígenas. Mas para isso, também nós precisamos de recursos para preparar as organizações indígenas para gerir esses recursos, para fazer a gestão desses recursos nas suas organizações, implementando ações para que possa mudar a qualidade de vida dos povos indígenas que hoje estão sofrendo, não mais, eu já nem chamo mais, a gente está fazendo os estudos em Roraima de planos de adaptação indígena, e a gente já nem chama mais de adaptação, a gente vive um colapso, né, do clima, impactando diretamente a vida social, a vida cultural dos povos indígenas. Quando a gente tem grandes queimadas na Amazônia, por exemplo, quanto vale um pé de castanheira pegando fogo? Quanto vale um pé de buriti pegando fogo? Né? Isso, às vezes, não tem uma quantificação, porque é um manejo com a nossa sabedoria que nós estamos fazendo para que as terras indígenas, nós somos parte da solução, nós somos a solução, mas nós precisamos de recurso para manter os nossos conhecimentos. Eu dizia em outra reunião, se o rio seca, a gente não tem como trazer a água de volta. Então, nós precisamos realmente ter políticas públicas claras para que realmente o impacto das mudanças climáticas, eles diminuam. E, para isso, os países precisam cumprir com os seus acordos, eles precisam cumprir com tudo que é acordado em conferências como essa. Mas quando a gente volta para o financiamento, esse financiamento, quando entra nos países, a gente não tem mecanismo claro que vão direto apoiar o que os povos indígenas precisam para continuar fazendo o seu trabalho que fizeram milenarmente, que é estar em conexão com a natureza, com a água, com o sol, porque isso é que faz com que nós possamos dizer que, por exemplo, a maior floresta tropical do mundo, a Amazônia, mantém ali intacta com os povos indígenas que estão ali. A gente tem que lembrar que tem povos que têm direito e nós precisamos garantir esse direito, principalmente o direito à terra. E para isso, desde que foi anunciado em Glasgow esses grandes financiamentos, há uma corrida dos povos indígenas também para construir os seus fundos, para que eles possam também acessar esses recursos. Então, no Brasil, nós temos vários fundos de povos indígenas sendo criados para que possam acessar esses recursos direto. É claro que nós sabemos que no Brasil nós passamos 4 anos praticamente sem apoio aos povos indígenas e a filantropia segurou muito essa questão para nós. Nós continuamos fazendo o nosso trabalho de guardiães da terra, monitoramento das nossas terras e nós precisamos sim desse financiamento, porque há um impacto que é causado que vem de fora para dentro e nós não temos todas as soluções para esses impactos. Porque agora nós vivemos há 3 anos secas severas. Nós vivemos as altas temperaturas em várias partes do mundo e no Brasil não é diferente. No Brasil, na Amazônia, vivemos recorrentemente secas e cheias muito rápidas. Não dá tempo de se refazer da última seca, onde nós perdemos as roças, onde mulheres tiveram as suas roças, suas casas queimadas, né? Então, a gente precisa realmente ter uma resposta rápida para isso. E quando saiu o recurso de perdas e danos, eu fiquei assim, muito feliz, porque eu fiz um trabalho para saber se os povos indígenas entendiam o que era perdas e danos. E as mulheres me falavam assim, perdas e danos para nós é porque o verão chega, o inverno chega, alaga tudo, a nossa roça, mata, e depois disso tudo, onde nós vamos buscar ajuda para as sementes que ficaram, onde nós vamos buscar ajuda para ter uma água potável. E eu fui analisando e eu disse, perdas e danos é para isso. É uma resposta rápida que não é uma adaptação. É uma resposta rápida que nós precisamos ter para uma ação do agora. Então, nessa questão do financiamento, eu ouvi realmente lá nas reuniões que eu participei em Nova York, na Semana do Clima, muitos dos parceiros, muitos, né, de financiadores, dizendo que vão desburocratizar a questão do financiamento para povos indígenas. Desburocratizar o financiamento para povos indígenas é dar a verdadeira atenção e dar um crédito aos povos indígenas que eles também sabem gerir os seus recursos. Os povos indígenas também sabem fazer a gestão dos seus recursos. Então, esse voto de confiança às organizações indígenas é muito importante, porque tem ações que só os povos indígenas conseguem implementar nas suas comunidades, devido às suas especificidades, às suas culturas, né? Então, nós sabemos disso. Essa questão do financiamento, ela é importantíssima. Não sei se na COP do Brasil a gente vai conseguir, né, levar para a COP do Brasil e ter todas as respostas. É claro, para nós vai ser, nós queremos uma COP onde todos os povos indígenas possam participar. Mas nós sabemos que no espaço da UNFCCC nem todos vão poder entrar. Mas nós queremos estar nesses espaços de decisões, onde nós tivermos participando, mesmo sabendo que os negociadores é quem faz todo esse trabalho, nós queremos estar nesses espaços de decisão para decidir por nós, para levar as nossas vozes a esses espaços. Então, é muito importante nós fazer essa reflexão na questão do financiamento e no direito dos povos indígenas. Como garantir o direito à terra? muitas vezes falaram para nós sobre essa questão, o que tem a ver demarcação de terra com clima? Se nós não tiver o território garantido, nós não estamos fazendo nada para a questão das mudanças climáticas, principalmente se a gente não garantir o direito dos povos com toda a sabedoria de manejar todas as florestas. Quando eu comecei a vir na Convenção do Clima, eu sempre ouvia falar que nós tínhamos que manter as florestas em pé. E eu sempre dizia, para além de manter as florestas em pé, nós temos que manter o direito das pessoas que estão dentro dessas florestas. Floresta tem direito, animais têm direito, e os povos indígenas também têm direito, que precisam ser olhados, precisa ser garantizado, precisa ser beneficiado a partir desses financiamentos. É claro que nós temos redes, grandes redes indígenas que hoje têm fundos que aportam e que chegam nas pontas. E exemplo disso somos nós, em Roraima, que nós fazemos um trabalho de estudo de caso de mudanças climáticas. Talvez no Brasil não tenha em outro lugar fazendo todos esses planos que nós chamamos de planos de enfrentamento às mudanças climáticas ou plano de adaptação indígena. Então, se chega um recurso, a gente consegue trabalhar. Também, quando chega um recurso, nós conseguimos ter as brigadas comunitárias que nos ajudam, por exemplo, nessa questão das queimadas, nas faltas das políticas públicas. Conseguimos fazer salas de situações onde a gente consegue monitorar as queimadas através da nossa própria organização e ajudando ainda órgãos do governo que estão fazendo esse trabalho em nossas terras indígenas. Então, essa questão do financiamento, ela é muito preciso pensar e refletir como de verdade a gente pode realmente ter recursos que vão impulsionar ainda mais o que os povos indígenas têm feito e continuarão fazendo, né, durante todo esse tempo que a gente tem trabalhado dentro dessas COPs, dentro das pré-COPs, porque para mim, para ser bem sincero para vocês, o que mais decide as questões que vêm para uma COP como essa é as conferências de Bonn. É lá que são negociadas todas essas questões. Aqui apenas vem para a gente olhar o que os acordos já vão ser feitos, já vão ser anunciados. Então, é muito importante a gente trazer esses exemplos do chão da comunidade, do que a gente tem de financiamento e a gente consegue fazer para pensar como os financiamentos podem chegar direto aos povos indígenas. Então, era essa reflexão que eu gostaria de fazer. Muito obrigada.
Obrigada, Sineia. Sineia was our last panelist, but we still have some time. So maybe we could open the microphone to questions and comments if anyone is up to it. We have microphones there. Okay.
Hi, my name is Rebecca. I'm with Namati and the Grassroots Justice Network. A lot of our network members have found themselves in the middle of carbon projects, and it's really tricky for them because of the tenure issues of not having clear tenure, but also because it creates conflict in a community where there's this promise of potential income. And if the community doesn't really love the carbon project, the money is tempting often. And so I'm curious during this COP, we hear a lot of conflating with carbon projects and financing. And I'm wondering about what you're seeing with this new pledge of where you expect carbon financing to potentially intersect with this, or whether this pledge can be a protection against that for Indigenous communities, or how you see that playing out.
Anyone else? Any more questions? Okay, Brian.
Okay. I want to you spoke about transparency, accountability. I want to know, like in the new pledge, where are we in trying to ask for transparency and accountability from the last pledge that was made. We heard that out of the 1 point something billion that was pledged, 80% of it has been disbursed. But from what we are hearing from the leaders, no one knows who has been given that money. So like we haven't had like a group of indigenous people who have said, oh, we have received that money, the 80% that have been disbursed. So like, I think we need to include that in the new pledge to say, okay, where is it? Who we have received it?
Thank you. Thank you for both questions. Do you have, we have space for one more intervention. Okay, I think we're good then. Thank you. And Hege, I think maybe you should, you were called to answer the questions.
Yes, I'd be happy to. I think I'll start with the last question, if that's okay, Rebecca. I didn't get your name, but okay, thank you. Ryan, thank you for the question. I think it's a very, very good point on transparency. So you're right that almost 80% has been dispersed. Where is it going? We just issued the report of the Forest Tenure Funders Group last week. So it's online. It's at the Land Portal website. It's also been shared at LinkedIn. And we do have some events where we will showcase some of the findings. However, the report is at an aggregated level. So we show how many funds to Africa, Latin America, and Asia, for instance, how many funds to different kinds of organizations. But the report itself, and then we have some good cases, some, that where you can read about specific cases that has been funded. But there is no website yet that shows exactly, each and every grant. As a public donor, what public donors have to report to what is called the OECD DAC, because that's a part of the rules for giving overseas development assistance. So we do have some numbers, and in various ways we showcase these on websites. Some of the philanthropic donors also showcase their funding on their website. I think, for instance, that the Ford Foundation does that. But some of the other some donors do either not have that capacity or they're not in this space for that reason, so to say. Yeah. So I think it's a very good point to ask for transparency. And it's very important to us. But we also have to realize that there are some private funders in this field who are not necessarily, they report to their boards, and that's the way they report, right? So if we have very strict requirements on transparency, there is a risk that we close the door for some funders to take part. Yeah, that's my point. Yeah, but I do agree with you, but yeah. But if we want a big tent, then there's a certain trade-offs, yeah, that to be inclusive on the funder side. Rebecca, your question on carbon markets, I think is extremely relevant and interesting. It's, to be honest, we haven't really sort of dived into that aspect yet, but since you asked, now we can. What I can share is I can share the position of the government of Norway, and you probably also saw that there was a statement from FCLP, from the Forest and Climate Leaders Partnership 2 days ago, where Indigenous people's tenure is mentioned as part of what high social and environmental integrity means. Yeah, so that's important. The Norwegian government position on carbon, voluntary carbon markets for forests is that we only support carbon markets that at the jurisdictional level. So we don't support individual carbon projects, but other funders can have different ways of approaching that issue. From the way I interpret what I hear from indigenous organizations is that there is no common position on, how we relate to carbon projects or programs at the jurisdictional level. So it's an issue that probably needs more discussion. But I think at least in REDD+, REDD+ isn't necessarily carbon markets, right? It's also overseas development aid. We have not, at least in our case, not included that much of that in our reporting on the pledge, because when we pay for results, it's up to the country or the jurisdiction that receives that payment to decide on the benefit sharing of it, right? But a lot of those, but it's also a requirement from certain standards to have a very good benefit sharing plan that has that social inclusion. Yeah, but it's not necessarily that an issue that funders depend on. It's because it's more on the supply side of the carbon market. Yeah. So and for that reason, of course, it's extremely important to have tropical forest country governments as part of the conversation, because they are also in the driving seat when it comes to the supply side of carbon markets. Thank you.
Thank you, Hege. And I heard Torbjørn also wants to make some comments about the questions.
Thank you. Yes, so just building on what Hege just said about carbon markets and REDD+, and reiterating what I said earlier about the Amazon fund. I think in the data we've looked at, I think it's a really interesting case, right? Because in the previous analysis and it's that we've done on this issue of funding for indigenous peoples and local communities, the Amazon fund does really stand out as a key source of funding in Brazil for many years until it was frozen in 2019, right? And even though the Amazon fund is in the carbon market mechanism, it is connected to REDD+ at the jurisdictional level. So the same kind of mechanism could be used to redistribute funding for REDD+ results generated in where the funding comes from the voluntary carbon market. So there is real potential there for that to become a substantial source of funding, but it's not easy. I think it took a lot of time for the Amazon fund to figure out how to do that. So I think also other countries looking into trying to do the same could learn from the experiences of the Amazon fund to try to kind of leapfrog some of the issues that they encountered. I wanted to address the question about transparency. After all, that's part of a big reason why we developed the Path to Scale dashboard. I think that's an excellent source of transparency on this issue. It's a natural place to start to kind of learn what donors are providing for this issue beyond those top line figures that get reported in the FTFG report. It's important to note that the dashboard does not monitor the IPNLC pledge, right? What we do with the dashboard is look much more broadly than the FTFG, and we kind of look at all donor reported aid disbursements to identify whether they are relevant for this cause or not. So our scope is broader than just the FTFG. There's also some FTFG funding that we're not able to include in the dashboard. So, as Hege mentioned, some of the philanthropic donors, for example, don't report publicly, and therefore we also don't have that in the dashboard. But this is a new thing. This may be something we can build out and include more data, and maybe this is also something we can use to interest more of the donors to report publicly what to which specific projects they are providing funding. There are also some limitations in how far in kind of the funding chain we're able to give information. What is publicly available is most of the time just the first transaction from a donor, a bilateral, multilateral, or philanthropic, to the first recipient. And as we know, in most cases, that is not an indigenous organization. That is can be a multilateral institution or large or international NGOs or national NGOs, other organizations, or indigenous or local community organizations. So there is a whole kind of a funding chain that we all like to know more about and we'd like to map out. So I just want to mention the initiative from GATC actually on the what's called the Friends of Paris initiative, a tracking of funds for indigenous people, which I think is also extremely important, that we work together, all the different actors that are involved in this space, and have this kind of information to find ways of kind of systematizing it, sharing it, so that it is more transparency and more knowledge and more insights, so we know more about where this funding goes and what are good funding channels, etc. So I just wanted to mention that as well. I think it's a very important initiative that all of us need to support in order to advance the transparency of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Torbjørn, and also thank you for mentioning the Friends of Paris process. It is an important process, and we are trying to build together a common framework to report the funds. Thank you very much, you all. I'll just give the floor to Balkissou Buba for the closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Leila, for giving me the floor to give some last comments, last remarks. I just want to thank everybody for making time to be here on a Saturday at a very late hour. We were not really expecting this turnout. We have a huge crowd. This really shows the commitment that people have towards not only financing for indigenous people and local communities, but for also climate solutions and climate actions. As we said, there is need for the pledge to be accountable. There is need for transparency. There is need for accountability. And just like the donors and the process is supposed to be accountable to indigenous people and local communities, so too are the indigenous people and local communities. They are supposed to be accountable to the donors, because at the end of the day, the donor cannot give us his money, and then at the end of the day, we cannot tell the donor what we did with the money. So we need the resources, we need to be accountable, we need to be transparent. And in order for this new pledge to really suit indigenous people, we need to build this together. Because if all of us remember, the Glasgow pledge was built without us. It was just like a surprise. It was even a good surprise that people really pledged 1.7 billion for us. But I think it will be better this time when we build a pledge together in Brazil for the next pledge, when we build it together, and that togetherness, not only building it together, but a pledge that respects our rights, because any climate action that does not respect the rights of indigenous people is no climate action. We need our rights to be respected. We need equally our lands, because everything that happens on our lands. And without recognizing and respecting the land rights of indigenous people, at the end of the day, we are not doing justice. When we talk about climate justice, let us respect the land rights of indigenous people. Let us respect the traditional knowledge of indigenous people, because this knowledge has always been there. This knowledge is tested and proven. This knowledge is highly scientific. So let us respect this knowledge. Let us document this knowledge, invest resources in documenting this knowledge, so that this knowledge can be used by current generations as well as future generations. So thank you all very much. I wish all of you a great evening. Enjoy yourself in Baku, and this is a weekend, so tomorrow rest. Enjoy Baku by day and by night. Good night.